guys, my name is Crash and I'm one of the moderators of a Tumblr called A Serendipitous Life. It's aimed at exploring and telling the stories of alternative lives and choices. Today I'm here to tell you a few things about BDSM and why 50 Shades of Grey is basically a BDSM Bible of what not to do. So, last spring, several of my friends were discussing a book I'd never heard of before. Some of them were excited that it transitioned from fanfiction to a published novel, and others were thrilled and not so thrilled about the exposure of the BDSM lifestyle it held. Not one to ever be ignorant when I could be talking, I downloaded a PDF of the book and started reading. Within the first 5 pages, I decided to absolutely tear the book apart. As an amateur editor, the writing alone was more than enough to play with, but by the time I got 20 pages in or so, I almost completely ignored the grammar and turned the critique, which you can find a link to in the description if you're so inclined, into an absolutely raging anger at E.L. James' portrayal of BDSM relationship. Basically, the actions and situations in the book are not an accurate or healthy portrayal of dominant and submissive relationships, nor are they a good place to start basing your own experience with power exchange. Rather, most of the things Christian Grey does are not dominant in the BDSM sense, but outright abusive. Let me take a second to say that I'm not the most experienced person when it comes to BDSM. I will never claim to be an expert or a mentor, but I have been immersed in the community for 6 years, starting online and transitioning slowly into real-life situations, and that some of those situations went very badly. Also, let it be known that in all my concrete power exchange experiences, I've played the role of the submissive. Some information may be directed primarily at fellow submissive, but the advice can easily be translated for dominance as well. Basically, this video is full of all of the things I wish I knew at the beginning. 1. SSC. The first and most important thing to know about BDSM, which stands for bondage, dominance, submission, and sadomasochism respectively, is the universal credo. This is the golden and unbreakable rule for BDSM communities, and is considered the most important thing to know and follow. This rule is that any and all BDSM activity must be safe, sane, and consensual, SSC. BDSM sex, scenes, or play can get intense, depending on the comfort levels and desires of people involved, but it must overall be safe, both physically and mentally, sane in regards to general common sense, and consensual, meaning all parties enthusiastically consent to all activities occurring. Any advice I give after this can be traced back to SSC at the root. 2. Do your research. Before you ever get involved in BDSM with someone specific, it's probably good to do some basic knowledge hunting. Find out what's out there, what you like and what you don't like. Have a basic understanding of where you think you fall on the spectrum from dominant to submissive, and what sort of things you may enjoy. Maybe you like bondage but not pain. Perhaps you like pain but not punishment. Maybe you like more mental than physical aspect. Try to have a loose grasp on these ideas before you embark on your kinky adventures. Ways to find this out start, of course, with the internet. There are a few resources that I used when I was learning about BDSM. One of them is called the Albany Power Exchange. It's got lots of basic information for beginners, definitions, terms, general protocol, that sort of thing. You'll find a link to it in the description. I still actually send people to APX for general advice and basic learning. So APX is a good place to start if you know absolutely nothing but think you might be interested. Another good place to do research would be forums. I know FetLife has forums. There was a really good submissives forum on Gaia Online for a while. Basically, find a forum that has people posting about what you need to read about. Be careful of the rules because there are a lot of forums, especially for subs, that forbid doms from posting. So make sure you read the protocol, but lurk on the forums, read everything from both sides so that you kind of know what you're getting into. Friends and people you know are also a good resource. If you're comfortable talking to them and you know that they've been involved in the BDSM scene in the past, they might be a good resource to start with. If you're not comfortable talking to them, that's fine, but if you are, they'll be able to give you personalized experiences. If they're local to your area, they might be able to tell you more about the local community, and that leads us, of course, to the local scene. If you run a Google search on your city, you'll probably find something called a munch. Munch is kind of a common term for gatherings of BDSM-minded people. Sometimes munches are vanilla, which means that there's no kink involved and no sex involved, no play involved, that sort of thing, and they're just people getting together and talking about the lifestyle. Other munches are more play party sort of things where people actually get together and do scenes, interact with each other with the dominance, the submission, the bondage, that sort of thing. Also, if you're planning on getting involved with people locally that you've met on the internet, it's another one of those kind of common sense internet dating things. You want to meet them in a public place first. You want to make sure that there are a lot of people around you. Get to know them first before you ever engage in any sort of play. So just be safe, be smart about it if you're meeting people in real life that you don't necessarily know otherwise. 3. Limits. Everyone has limits when it comes to sex. They're just usually much more important when you enter into a power exchange. It's important to know not only your partner's limits, but also your own limits, so that you don't allow an activity to go too far or too fast and end up hurt, scared, or otherwise uncomfortable. Limits generally come in two types, hard and soft, and that sounds kind of weird, but they're pretty easy to understand. Hard limits are things that you're absolutely not into, will never be into, not an option. It's not changing, it's not moving. Those are really important to know, not only for your partner, but also for yourself, so that everyone's aware of what not to do. It's a no-go zone. It's not going to happen. Soft limits, on the other hand, are things that you maybe aren't sure of, or that you want to try, but you're kind of nervous, or something that you've never heard of that maybe your partner wants to try, and you have no idea how you feel about it. That can be a soft limit, so you can let them know, maybe, hey, I'm nervous about this, hey, I don't know what this is, and that's one of those things where they can be changed, they're malleable. So make sure you always discuss changing soft limits. Don't just like dive in and be like, oh, you said it's a soft limit so we can try it. Bring it up in conversation. Don't just kind of jump in and change things all of a sudden. And it's also important to remember that while limits are often talked about in terms of submissives and what they can take and what they can't, dominants also have limits. Some dominants like inflicting pain, some don't. Some can do punishments, some can't. If you're a submissive, make sure you are also aware of that, because you don't want to ask your dom to do anything that makes them uncomfortable. So just make sure that on both sides the dialogue is open and everyone involved in whatever scene you're doing is aware of everybody else's limits. 4. Safe words. Limits and safe words go hand in hand. If you have a limit, you have to have a way to let your partner know when they're approaching it. Similar to road signs that warn of impending curves or bridges that might be icy, safe words are designed to keep everything on track or to halt things when necessary. Basic safe words for very beginners tend to go by the stoplight system. Green means go, everything's good, this is great, I'm digging it feels great. Yellow means I'm not sure about this, I'm kind of uncomfortable. It means that maybe someone did something too hard or too rough, but you don't necessarily want to stop. You just want them to back off a little bit, be a little bit gentler. It doesn't mean stop everything. It just means take it slow, take it easy. Red is what's traditionally considered a safe word. When you say red, if that's your chosen safe word, that means everything stops. There's no extra touching, there's no like coercion into doing more. Red is you're done. Everything stops. And that's the same with any sort of safe word. So if you don't like the stoplight system, or if you progress to the point where you don't think you need that middle word, whatever it happens to be, and you choose a word like oranges to be your safe word, that means if you say oranges, your partner's done, you're done, everything is over. So that's what a safe word is for. It's to make sure that nothing progresses too far, and that if things are getting bad in any sense, or uncomfortable, or too painful, you say that safe word and everything's done. Non-verbal safe words are also important, because if you're ever doing a scene where you're maybe being choked, or you have a gag, or it's loud, or anything like that, having a non-verbal safe word is a very good thing. It can be anything from a snap of the fingers, which can be kind of hard to do, to like a triple tap on the arm. Sometimes it's referred to as tapping out. It's the same thing as a safe word, you just do it with your hands rather than your mouth. It's also important to note non-verbal cues. This is especially important if you're consistently sleeping or engaging in other BDSM activity with the same partner or multiple partners. If your partner's not usually someone who gets quiet and they're suddenly quiet, if they're crying or shaking and they seem uncomfortable, those are also things to be aware of, especially as a dominant, because there are times where your submissive may be too far in a brain space where they maybe don't realize right away that they should be using their safe word. And if you think something's off, go with your gut. Stop the scene. It's better to stop it without that safe word. Check with your partner and make sure everything's okay, or deal with things if they're not, rather than continue the scene past a point where the partner would usually stop it and then end up with all sorts of tangled emotional and maybe physical problems afterwards. The most important thing about safe words is if you don't use them, they don't work. And this goes specifically to the submissives that are watching, because I know that I've had problems with it in the past. My first dominant was horrible at respecting safe words. When I would tell him red, which was my chosen word at the time, instead of backing off, leaving it alone and talking it through, he would back off for a few seconds and then go right back in, and that's not how you're supposed to use safe words. So please remember, if you're a submissive, use your safe words or they cannot help you. If you're a dominant, respect those safe words or you're doing it wrong. Use them, use them, use them. 5. Aftercare. BDSM almost always takes a lot of energy, whether that energy is used physically or mentally. After any BDSM scene, playing, or sex, it's important for everyone involved to have time for aftercare. to affirm that everyone feels safe, calm, and protected. So there are a few types of aftercare. The first and maybe most obvious is physical aftercare. That includes cuddling, which almost always happens after sex anyway, but is also really important after a scene for many people. It includes things like water. I've noticed that BDSM can be really dehydrating depending upon how long a scene goes on and how much bodily fluid is involved. My advice is to keep water on standby. Don't feel weird about going straight to that water bottle after you're done. And also for physical aftercare, there's that little caveat about wounds and blood. So not every BDSM group or partnership is going to have to deal with this, but depending upon how intense your play ends up. So if you are engaging in play that involves skin breakage or ligature marks, please make sure that you're taking care of those things as soon as possible so that you don't get more hurt or infected or uncomfortable, anything like that. There's also mental aftercare. That also includes cuddling, because a lot of times, especially for the submissive, having that closeness after a scene reminds them that they did well, that you're not going to leave them right away, that they're safe, that they have time to kind of come up from that space. Is the same for dominance. I know a lot of dominants that go into something they call dom space to kind of parallel that idea of subspace. This is the time for what a lot of people call affirmations, and this is specifically important for the dominant to give to the submissive, but can also go the other direction. And that's where the terms like you were good, good girl, good boy, like you did well, you were great, that sort of thing. I found that in my experience especially, they're very helpful when I'm coming up out of that kind of sub-brain space. If you've got that thought in your head that wow, that was great, verbalize it. Make sure that your partner's aware of it. Aftercare is also a specifically good time for communication about what went well and what went badly, what needs to be talked about, and what can be done differently. If you and your partners were trying something new and it didn't work out, let them know. If they tried something new and it worked wonderfully, let them know. If their knots were too tight, say so. If they hit too hard, say so. If they didn't hit hard enough, tell them. They can't read your mind and you can't read theirs, so make sure that dialogue is open. Aftercare is a great spot for this, especially if you're in a sort of BDSM relationship that isn't 24/7. Maybe you guys just meet to play or have sex. That's when that communication should really happen. Something important to note when we're talking about aftercare is the concept of subspace and dom space. Those terms aren't necessarily universal, but I've used them and heard them used by several different people, and the concepts are pretty well known. After a sustained amount of time being either submissive or dominant to someone, your brain kind of latches into a rut. A lot of times there's spiked adrenaline, endorphins, and all sorts of other things that can be potentially confusing. So a lot of times your brain almost gets a switch flipped in it. There's this different sort of energy that goes with that. So an important part of aftercare also is to make sure that everyone who may be going through that brain space has time to come out of it. If you're separated suddenly from your partner or your partners after that sort of brain space, especially for a submissive, it can lead to this huge sense of loss or failure or just general emptiness, and it's just really unpleasant. 6. Domination versus abuse. This is a distinction I hold very near and dear to my heart. My very first dominant was not a good one. He often stretched and even crossed lines between dominance and straight out force and abuse. Doms, it's very important that you remember that your role as a dominant doesn't give you free reign to everything. Submissives, it's also very important to remember that even if you're submissive to someone, you have the right to tell your dominant that they're overstepping their boundaries or encroaching on your limit. I know it can be hard to talk back to your dom, especially if you're already with a dominant who's edging towards abuse, but it's never okay to feel forced, scared, uncomfortable, or in unwanted pain at the hands of your dominant. Limits and safe words have to be respected. If you're in a relationship where you give the safe word and they aren't listening, that's bad. If you talk to them about that and they continue it, get out. If you give a safe word and they're not listening to you, you need to talk to them about that, because safe words are final. They're important, and if they're not being respected, you need to walk away from that situation if it's not something that can be fixed. Red, or your chosen safe word, means stop, hands off, scene over. It does not mean stop for 30 seconds and come back. Please make sure that your safe word is being used and respected correctly. Also, coercion is never consent. If your dominant is using mental, physical, or emotional means to get you to do or say things that you are uncomfortable with, that's coercion, and that's not okay. If you have things you're not comfortable talking to them about and they're using their dominant position in your life to force you to say those things, that's coercion and that is abuse. That is not domination, and it is not okay. If you're ever uncomfortable, something is wrong. If they're exploiting you in public in ways that make you uncomfortable, that is abuse, that is not domination, and it's not okay. Make sure you talk to them about it, and if they cease to listen to you, you need to find a way out of that situation. please, submissives, don't confuse dominance for total control. If you're uncomfortable, stop the situation. Please don't feel like because someone is your dominant right now, they have total control over your life, especially if that's not something you're looking for. So those are some of the most important BDSM basics. Keep in mind that the credo of safe, sane, and consensual should apply to all sexual encounters, and that if at any point you're ever uncomfortable with any sexual situation, you have the right to tell your partner or partners to stop. Also, as with any sex, make sure you're using proper precautions and protection. Birth control, condoms, dental dams, latex gloves. Make sure you have that safety and protection and that everything is as sterile and healthy as can possibly be, and you're getting tested regularly and keeping any gear and toys clean and sterile. Alright guys, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this wasn't too much, and I hope that you learned something today. I'll talk to you all later.